Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Talk Show. Today, we're going to be talking about Pope Francis's recent comments about homosexuals in the seminary.
Yeah, we're going to look at Pope Francis's alleged comment. We're going to see what Pope Benedict has said about it. And we're going to talk about whether or not it is appropriate for homosexual men to enter the seminary and to try to become Catholic priests.
All right, well, it's been a minute. I just got back from a vacation, so this thing, has kind of hit the Catholic world. And I guess my first question would be, where are we with this statement? Is it something that was made up? Did he actually say it? At some point, you have to, on the internet, figure out what the source is and figure out whether it's true first.
Well, Ryan, again, it does appear to be true. I mean, the Vatican, he's come out and apologized for it. So now, for people who aren't sure what we're talking about, the Pope was having a closed-door meeting with the Italian Bishops' Conference, and he was talking about the seminaries. And he used a word, and my Italian's not great, Ryan, but frotagine, which translate basically to faggotry, right? So he's saying there is in the seminaries, let's not accept any more homosexuals because there's already too much faggotry there. Now, in Italian, frotagine, that's the specific term, but a lot of people are like, "Wow, I can't believe the Pope said this." I think Italian being his second language, he might not have realized the strength of that particular word in Italian. Maybe if he was speaking in Spanish, he would have said something a little bit differently.
Right.
I think he was trying to make the sense of I think what's well known is that there's kind of a homosexual contingent within the priesthood, within seminaries, and within the hierarchy of the church. And I don't think that's really a secret. But the larger thing is that how does that affect the church? And I think that's what we should talk about here today.
Yeah, and when I was in the seminary, I remember the Bishop of Tyler, not the one now, but the one previous to him, came in and gave a talk to us seminarians. Like, some people would just drop in, and then the rector would get somebody to come talk to us. We got to talk to Giussani's right hand man that wrote Putting on the Ritz, God of the Ritz. And yeah, so he mentioned that during that talk. I think Pope Benedict mentioned that. When we're talking about homosexuals, are we talking about active homosexuals, people with same-sex attraction? I mean, the church reverts to same-sex attraction when discussing this, and obviously, we're all sinful, and that might be somebody's cross to bear. Has that line been drawn in any of the statements that have been made by Pope Benedict or Pope Francis in this regard?
Well, Pope Francis famously said, "Who am I to judge?" Right?
Yeah.
About homosexuals, but specifically in this instance, he was talking about whether or not they should be admitted to the priesthood, whether or not they should be admitted to the seminaries. Period. And Pope Benedict released a letter. It was called "The Criteria for the Discernment of Vocations with Regards to Persons with Homosexual Tendencies in View of Their Admission to the Seminary and the Holy Orders." That's a mouthful there. But he said it very, I think, clearly that I want to quote this exactly: deep-seated homosexual tendencies. So not just active homosexual lifestyles, but even the tendencies. People who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies. Here's dealing with homosexual tendencies that were only the expression of a transitory problem. Even people who had the inclination to be gay, both Pope Benedict and now Pope Francis has said, should not pursue the priesthood. And even more so, they say that it would be disingenuous for them to lie to try to cover it up. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
Well,
I know I've met some priests who were obviously from my gaydar, were obviously gay, right? And I don't know if they were bad or good priests, but in their interaction, they were fine, right?
yeah.
But does it create a bigger problem? And, what kind of issues does this cause in the church, in your opinion?
Well, I do think the masculine heart should be celebrated. It should be front and center, just like women and femininity. It's something that's ingrained in us. And to be a father, I know personally, to be a father, it obviously requires me to have relations with my wife, right? So I think in the church, the vocation, the mystical vocation of the priesthood, the nature of being a father, um, if you're attracted to the same sex, I think in some cases it would impede on some of the masculine heart that's required to serve God and his church in a way that uh brings life. And I think that also goes to anything, right. I mean, we want to try to stay away from sin to react to the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and God. And the priesthood is a higher calling. It's definitely a calling that, if you're going to get into it, and I would look at it the same way as marriage. I went with my first wife to see a priest to get married,
Yeah.
and he said no. um and we went into the Baptist church, which ended up burning down later on.
No.
I got a divorce and whatever. But as I
Divorce or whatever, and the church burned
yeah.
down. I think God was telling you something, Ryan.
Oh, I know he was trying to tell me something.
I'm sure.
And we obviously, mistakes were made. There's two parts to that whole, and there's a fracture there, and it never began on a footing of God.
Mhm.
So the church has, I don't want to say the right, the church has the responsibility and the duty to understand the vocation of marriage before the blessing of the church is relayed to them in the sacrament of matrimony. And it's the same way with the priesthood, like the preparation of becoming a priest and the forms of formation, right? The intellectual form, the spiritual form, the psychological form that I was a part of. I really understood to be a holistic approach to forming a priest that will go into the church and loves the church like a bride.
Mm.
So, obviously you'll take a soundbite here, but in all cases, the expansion of that soundbite into content, intent, all these things, that's what we're hoping to talk about here today. And that's my experience. And even though I was mad, I look back on that and I go, this guy did me a favor,
Sure.
right? He did me a favor in my vocation. And I didn't see that until later, but that was something that was really important to me, that the church said no to my marriage, because of
Yeah.
the situation of our lives, and, the fact that we just wanted to get it done. And, he's like, this isn't a marriage, guys,
Yeah, and I think the wisdom there and the parallel is that the church is saying that the church said you shouldn't get married, and the church is telling these individuals they should not become priests, they should not pursue the
Right.
priesthood. So I'm going to read it directly from, this is now Pope Benedict's. This I think was from 2017. In the deep-seated homosexual tendencies, which are found in a number of men and women, are also objectively disordered, and for those same people often constitute a trial. Such persons must be accepted with respect and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. They are called to fulfill God's will in their lives and to unite the sacrifice of the Lord's cross, the difficulties they may encounter. In light of such teaching, the dicastery, in accordance with the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, believes it is necessary to state clearly that the Church, while profoundly respecting the persons in questions, cannot admit to the seminary or to holy orders those who practice homosexuality, present deep-seated homosexual tendencies, or support the so-called gay culture.
Right.
That's pretty clear and definitive from Pope Benedict. And I think a lot of people might have been thinking, oh, well, Pope Francis, he's the cool Pope, he's going backwards, and who am I to judge? And, the whole
Yeah,
lesbian
the
gay marriage,
online haters and all that. Now what do
right.
they hate? It's like they're gonna allow it's just, yeah, the internet. We've had some shows about that. Yeah. No, I firmly believe it. I remember going into the seminary and we were in that crisis, and my dad was just like, "What are you doing, man? Like this is not, what you want to do, man." I'm like, "Hey, I'm gonna go down there. I want to serve the church. It's time for men to step up." And I got down to the seminary and we're throwing elbows on the basketball court. Like there's all these young guys in there that are dudes were, playing ball and having fun and praying. And, so you saw this crop of individuals come up that really wanted to serve the church as guys. And, you know, I, that was before any of these statements were made, but
Mhm.
started to see this crop in the church come up. I will say this too, with the McCarrick scandals and all this, you can see how through the homosexual tendencies of or the deep-seated homosexual tendencies, how going unchecked in the church can run rampant in political circles and create like you said, like a cabal or a group of individuals that are acting out on this, that their focus and their heart is not for the mother of the church, the bride of Christ. It's for their own gratification sexually. And so, we had the worst popes episode, and we went
Sure.
through a couple of whoa, dude, and you could just tell how through those tendencies, some really bad stuff can take place. So, how do you relate this to like other sin? It's just like, when I was in formation, we had to be clear on the things that are drawing us away from God and obviously seek his mercy. But I do think there's a radar on what are these things and are these things overcomable? Like, can you overcome them? Are they significant, right? Like, is this like a really tough demon that you're trying to break free of? And God, I do think they were made aware of that in the formation process to make decisions and say, look, probably shouldn't be a priest right now. And that's just broadly speaking with, I'm sure pornography came up and all of that too as well. Fortunately, I was not dealing with that during that time, but they do look for, if you're going to be a priest, you're going to be alone in a parish, possibly. You do have a lot of freedom. And so
Mhm.
they want to make sure your intentions with that freedom is for the bride of Christ.
You mentioned a couple things there that I want to touch on that I think are part of the problem that a lot of people, particularly, let's just say Pope Francis, when he used this term, is trying to address. And, I don't want to say cabal. I want to go back to Bishop Polmeyer and his always assuming the good, right? And always trying to
Mhm.
understand the good someone else
Right.
is seeking. But I think it would be disingenuous, and I don't think, refutable, the fact that there is I would say, gay lobby. They call it the Lavender Mafia.
Yeah.
I would say that it's probably, in my experience, people with typical inclinations tend to congregate together, right?
Yep.
Dudes like us, we like to laugh and joke around, have a good time, we congregate together. People who
Right.
probably within the church have homosexual tendencies probably congregate together and create a little lobby. And what do you do? Well, if you get into, you tend to want more people like yourself around yourself. So let's say in the church, you get a couple bishops who are of those tendencies. Well, they appoint other bishops, and then they appoint bishops, and you get kind of this grouping where they start to have almost a voting block, right?
Right.
And I think that's really evident in the church. Now, okay, homosexuals, great. They can love God more than I do. That's
Sure.
not a question.
100%.
But what is it that they're seeking? I think one of the most dangerous words in all of history, and particularly in Christendom, is justification. Right? It's what split Western Christianity is. What justifies a man? A lot of times, people will want their sexual proclivities and inclinations to be justified and told that they're all right because they either feel bad about it, they've been told that their sexuality is wrong, etc. So they want
Right.
to be justified in it. So they will go have people around them who will affirm them, right? You always hear that word, affirmation, right? I think you have some of that in the church where you have these bishops who will affirm each other in the, hey, dude, it's cool. You're gay, I'm gay. We want to do the best for the church. I don't think that that's necessarily a problem or a scandal or the devil and the smoke of Satan in the church. Now, here is where it becomes a problem. When their activities and their policies, their teaching, and their evangelization are centered on trying to justify the unjustifiable, which is trying to get license to get the church to loosen up on its teaching on homosexuality, to get the church to get with the times, man.
Become an
Everyone's
activist.
right. And they're no longer protecting the patrimony and the teaching of the apostles.
Right.
That's when this in the church becomes a problem. And the
Yeah.
seminaries. Now, this is one of the worst things I've ever heard. Brian, you went to seminary, and like you said, they found out some of your issues, right? And
Yeah.
anyone going in, they get a psychological evaluation. They
Mm.
say, "Well, have you ever done this? Have you ever done this?" Right? Be honest. Has this ever happened? And they get into your sexual history, right?
Mhm. That's right.
I mean, what was that experience like?
Well, in my case, I'll never forget this. This is so funny, and maybe I told you this before, but we're all sitting at a table. Bishop Gallione, God rest his soul, I believe he passed recently. Um, just a real fiery Italian guy, and so we're all sitting around the table. And part of it is you write your story. So I'm
Mhm.
writing my story, how I came to know Christ, but all the things that I did in my past. Mainly the focus was not necessarily girls and deviant behavior there. Yes, there was, a sinful relationship there, but that what I think is important here, also funny in the story, is that, I wrote a lot that I partied like a lot, right? Like I was just, and I'll never forget this woman, sweet lady, said, "Hey, what they were interested in is when you party, did you party with people or did you drink alone or party alone?"
Mhm.
And what they were really asking was, is this behavior, is this sin a closeted thing that could be a real problem? And of course I said, "Oh no, like I'm very well known by cops and everybody."
Well,
So, like I have parties where people are walking miles to get to this place because there's
you
just
are the CPO, dude. You're the chief party officer.
yeah. And I'm going into it like I was kind of proud of it, and I didn't really see the connection there. And I remember Bishop Gallion sticking his head out and going, "That's good, man. You don't need to go into more detail." And he backed up.
Dude, this one time I was hanging out with the dudes from Limp Bizkit. We got a
Yeah,
bag and we were partying. Like, dude, no. Stop right there, Ryan.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I guess my point is I didn't really draw the connection of what they were looking for
Mm-hmm.
until after. And the wisdom there, and I think also the wisdom here is that, and I don't want to say closeted, but I do want to say like something that you act on in private. And I think pornography is another thing where you're in front of a computer. This is a serious sin, right? And it's gonna block and impede the inspiration of God using you in his church to provide sacraments and healing to the people. It's a distraction to the potential of the priesthood. And so I think that's where they were making these remarks is they didn't want a priest that just went back to the rectory and just drank all day,
Sure.
because there's no service to the church. It's just a service to sinful inclinations. Obviously being outgoing and partying is a different thing, but I do think that there's, it's both parts are bad, but I do think that they had a pulse on inclinations for sin in a private nature, right?
Mhm.
Which in this case, certainly private with other people, right? With other men in this case. And so, the other thing I've heard people say and some of these allegations that have come out in documents that have been formed is that we as priests do not take a vow of, is it celibacy or is
They
it
think about chastity.
chastity, right? And it's not a vow of, and so they work around this stuff. And it's like,
Yeah.
look, if you're missing the point of this and you're skirting around it for your own to approve and affirm your own behavior, and especially in this regard,
Justification.
justification. Like, look, man, this probably isn't the vocation for you. Like, you can go do that somewhere else. Like, you can live that life somewhere else. But again, elevating the vocation of marriage, the
Mm-hmm.
priesthood, where the church gives its blessing, and 99% of the time, it's generally speaking it for a good purpose. But it will make people mad. It will make people angry. I was angry, but I look back and I'm really grateful for this priest.
Yeah. So you mentioned how that process went, but one of the dangers, and this is something that I've heard, and this is kind of no one will put their name to this because they don't want to be the person who mentions this publicly, but those processes where people are uncovering and sharing some of their deepest, darkest secrets, particularly in their sexuality. And let's say a young man goes in there and they're like, well, have you ever done this, that, or the other thing? And they say yes. That becomes an opportunity for blackmail, sexual blackmail, and for controlling people. And
Yeah.
this is something that I've heard happens in seminaries a lot. South America, Europe, and to some extent the United States. Now, basically what will happen is a young man will go in there and like, have you ever had sex with a dude? And they'll say, yes. Well, then the seminary director will say, he's one of us. I've got power over them. Now they will use it to either sexually manipulate them and force them into having sexual relationships,
Yep.
or say, you better kind of toe the line in this party or in this mafia, the Lavender Mafia. And if you don't, well, your sexual secrets will be revealed. And a lot of men have run to the priesthood to say, well, I'm gay, I don't want to be, so I'm going to go be celibate. And where can I be celibate and okay as a priest? It's what happens, right? A lot of people hide their homosexuality behind a collar, and that is what the church is trying to avoid. They are
Right.
not saying that homosexuals are inherently evil. They say they are disordered in their sexual orientation, but they're not inherently evil. In fact, they need to be treated with respect and dignity, and all sides of unjust treatment should be avoided. But when you have people hiding their sexuality behind a vocation, that's when you get into these big scandals, these big problems where we're having gay orgies at the Vatican, we're
Right.
having blackmail scandals, we're having priests being elevated to bishops and positions of power because they have the same sexual orientation. Then you're creating movements within the church that are trying to change church teaching just to justify sexual attractions. That is the problem that Benedict was avoiding.
Yeah.
That is the problem that I think Pope Francis was trying to mention here when he used this word that he's apologized for.
Yeah. It becomes a grooming process, like
Yep.
you were mentioning, because you have to groom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes acting upon that in a group of people where authority is in play, right?
Sure.
And that is the I think that is another thing. It's like now you're giving them authority in the church, whether it's at a parish or whatever. And what are they doing with that authority if they're acting out on this? It's basically sustaining um, a disordered sexual life in something that requires an obligation and a duty to be celibate, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think it's great that he said it. I know that the church has always, for the last 20 whatever years has been saying this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I do also know that, especially with the McCarrick scandals, where this can lead when you have people in positions of power to manipulate, groom, all these things were all laid out that it did happen. So I think it's good the church is trying to put a stop to it. And, but the church is big and broad, and there's probably always going to be some of this going on in the church. I just think it's good for our leaders to state that this is not what we want,
Yeah.
because there are bishops that listen to what the Pope says, and they have before, especially when I was in the seminary. That's when it all started to manifest itself. Like I remember getting a visitation from Rome, and we said what we thought about teachers teaching things that were wrong,
Mm-hmm.
about people acting out in ways that are inappropriate. And to their credit, they came in and removed people in power to reset the seminary back on its course of forming men in a particular way.
So did you see any of this Frotigiane when you were in seminary?
Yes. Well, I don't have a gaydar. It's especially being good looking, it's definitely not a good mix.
Right, it's a cross, man. You're just,
Well,
you're.
I like to see the best in everybody wherever they're at, and I don't just get into those little details. But I know when somebody changes their voice, right, to sound
Mhm.
a certain way, that there's a level of inauthenticity, and then when they change it to sound like a woman, we got a problem, right? And so there was a guy in our seminary that acted and uh, acted like a girl,
Mm.
essentially. Fortunately, this young man did not become a priest and left the seminary. Um, but again, I don't have a gaydar, but I would say 80 to 90% of these guys that were in my seminaries were I could say were men,
Mm.
but you never know. Like again, my gaydar sucks. So
Yeah. Right.
I'd love to give you more information about it, but
Right.
it's something I got to work on, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, I guess no one's trying to find them all. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I think though that's kind of important about this is that okay, well, okay, the church doesn't want men who have homosexual tendencies. Well, what about are they calling out like men who just are absolute skirt chasers who just all
Right.
they want is women? Are they not welcome in the seminary? Are like men who have sexual addictions? Are they not welcome in the seminary as strongly as homosexual persons? I would say yes. That's something they'll sniff out in the process as well. But
Yeah.
I think the difference is, and this is going to be nuanced, and I'm bear with me here. Homosexual persons, a lot of times, even in that letter that I read of Pope Benedict, say the so-called gay culture, they identify themselves, and one of the main things that gives them their personal identity is their sexuality.
Hmm.
It's the same thing like Protestants. Protestants identify their whole religious structure based on one thing, that they protest the Catholic Church. A lot of homosexuals that they're referencing here will base their whole life around one thing, their sexuality. So it becomes an area of inordinate focus in their life where, a regular, a guy with normal sexual tendencies, right? He goes into seminary, yeah, I like girls, but, I'm willing to become celibate for the church. Okay. They're not defining themselves by their sexuality, and they're not trying to push agendas. They're not trying to justify everything based around one thing, right? The thing that you should be as a priest is that you want to be a priest after the order of Jesus Christ. That should be the one defining thing. And if you have a competing defining characteristic, in this case homosexuality, it can clash with that vocation.
Right.
And I love what Benedict wrote in this letter a long time ago. This was from, no, boy, I think like the 80s. It was when he was still Joseph Ratzinger. He said, and this is from the letter to the bishops of the Catholic Church on the pastoral care of homosexual persons. He said, and this is from chapter 16, the human person, made in the image and likeness of God, can hardly be adequately described by a reductionist reference to his or her sexual orientation. Everyone living on the face of the earth has personal problems and difficulties, but challenges to growth, strength, talents, and gifts as well. Today, the church provides a badly needed context for the care of the human person when the church, she refuses to consider the person solely as a heterosexual or a homosexual and insists that every person has a fundamental identity, the creature of God, and by his grace, his child and heir to eternal life. You're not just gay. You're not just transgender. You're not whatever you identify. You are something more. And when you only are focusing on one aspect of yourself, you're limiting yourself, and the church refuses to view you as that because the church wants to see you in your highest form, which is a heir and a son of the Creator, what more, or son or daughter of the Creator.
Yeah, it's like a hierarchical, holistic approach to life, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the when you're consumed by something that you're putting a microscope on and filtering that into every part of your life, you're kind of losing this whole idea that God loves us deeply, and trying to approach him to feel that sense of adoption, to acknowledge him, that is what filters into the rest of our life. That is how one lives a more holistic approach to living their faith out. And so these what they call deep seated, that's it. It's the seed of your life, and they're deep and profound in one area, um, your sexuality. And
Mm-hmm.
so that does limit a person's capacity to receive God's grace. It limits their capacity to prioritize their faith in a particular way, in light of the fact that they're called to this vocation of a priesthood.
Yeah, it's an imbalanced view of yourself when you're
Right.
reducing yourself to one aspect of your being. That's
Yeah.
and that
Or
that,
other
that
people, right? Like other
right.
people do it and they're like, "Hey, this is who I am." And I'm like, "No, man, you're way, way better than this. Like
Hmm.
you're reducing something and then carrying that out into the world instead of seeing the bigger picture of, who you are in God's eyes."
So, what place do homosexuals have in the church? I mean, what's appropriate for them? I mean, certainly they have the same creator. They are worthy of the same sacrifice of Calvary of Jesus Christ as anybody else. I mean, the
Yeah.
Pope died for the most ostentatiously unabashed homosexual as he did for the Pope. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what Jesus came to do. So, how does this kind of language that will sound very exclusionary to a lot of people,
Sure.
how will that impact the people who are, just gay and trying to go to church and trying to love God? I mean, they're going to hear this and say, Pope hates us, And I don't think that's the case.
Well, you're always going to have, especially on the internet, you're going to have people move to strike. And it's
Yeah.
sad, but it doesn't matter what the Pope says, anyways. Like they're going to do that anyways. I think
Yeah.
what we're talking about is people who genuinely struggle and understand that this struggle is related to an inclination to sin, which is carte blanche. Everybody in the church, we're all trying to avoid sin and be closer to God, hopefully. And, it's something that as a layperson, we know that people have worked through psychologically, spiritually, physically, worked through a healing process, just like all of us. And, this church is about perpetuating God's mercy and the Holy Spirit and taking what he's giving us in the church as this vehicle to our salvation. He's a loving God, he loves you where you're at. In divine mercy, the divine mercy message, he says the person who is in the most sin in the world is has the greatest access to my mercy, to access to
Right.
the most.
It's right to the mercy.
Yeah. So it's this sort of continuum of mercy and sinners, and a good and loving God. And that's the perspective, right? That's bigger than what is my sexual inclination and identifying yourself as that, right?
Right.
Instead of backing up and saying, what does the church teach? Am I in need of a conversion in certain areas of my life, which we always are? That's how we all come together as a community. We come together as a community with that joyful resurrection of God entering into our lives and sustaining us with mercy and his love.
Now conversely, there's going to be people who are like, yeah, the Pope slam dunked on the gays, right? He said faggotry. The Pope is so base, man. He's red pilled, right? And you're going to have people celebrating this for, I think, really the wrong reason, right? Now,
Yeah.
they're going to be like, oh, yeah, finally we're getting one back against them. And it's about this kind of adversarial nature that everyone has against each other who are not like them. I don't think that's the appropriate response here either. And I think in the Pope's apology for using this word, I think that's what he's going to most regret having caused. Not that he doesn't think that homosexuals should be in the seminary. They shouldn't, and that's what he believes. That's what all the popes previously have believed. But he doesn't, I don't believe, and I wouldn't believe, or wouldn't want personally, for this to be an opportunity for people to be treated poorly, people to be treated with,
Well, and
you
and
know,
again, it's the
bias and negativity.
yeah, and again, it does go back to what you said. It's like your intentions, what assuming they're good intentions, it's coming from a place of people who love the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's coming from a place of people who want what's best for the church.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing that on more of a corporate level and a generalization, what you do is you can ostracize people who are in need of God's healing, who might read this message and say, not only do I not want to be a priest, but maybe I should consider talking with somebody about
Maybe I should be an Anglican. They want all the gay priests they can get,
that door's always open.
right?
It
Well, you
swings
see that
both
online. They're like,
ways.
"Oh, you're so gay. Why don't you just become an Episcopalian?" Right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. And
that,
you're running
that's
from a
that's not what
problem.
Christ wants. That is not what Christ does not want to say, "Hey, you're a sinner. Go
Right,
somewhere else."
right.
That's I know that's not true.
Yeah, so there's that dissonance, right? It's like,
Mhm.
okay, we're going to talk about this and we're going to champion this, and you guys have destroyed our church. We want it back, like all this stuff. And the real shape of things, what you're doing is you're just causing a sort of tribe, that creates factions that just war against each other. And it's like, it's kind of not really what Jesus is thinking. Is in the church we just go after each other. Um,
Given the same benefit of the doubt, let's say to conservatives, people say, "Oh man, they hate gays. They hate people that are different than themselves." And I'm going to go back. I can't remember which general said it, but they're like, "You don't win a war by hating what's in front of you. You win a war by loving what's behind you."
right.
Conservatism is not about hating the people who are trying to change things. It's about loving the way things are, loving their traditions, their families, their country, their faith, their communities, and wanting to preserve it, right?
Yeah.
So when people, that's a clash. And again, if you were looking at what they're seeking, conservatives, is that they love the things that formed them, the
Yeah.
things that nurtured them and mothered them, and the things that made them into who they are. So when you're maybe a liberal person or someone who's trying to get maybe the church to change in this teaching or that, and saying you're backwards, you're aggressive, and you are wrong, and you hate things, they're like, no, I'm not. I'm not. I love the church. I want to preserve it. And again, if they could see the good that they're seeking, that conservatives are seeking, I think you that's one of the most profound things I've ever learned, and that was from Bishop Polmeyer, is to see the good that somebody is seeking, right?
Right.
Because then you can understand their motivations.
That's right.
Conservatives love what's behind them. Liberals, in this instance, want to be loved and accepted. Okay,
Yeah.
it's all about love. That's what everyone wants. They want to be loved and they want to love because that's what we are. We are created to love God, love others. And all sins come from defect of love.
Yeah. It's just a depravity, loving something that's smaller than God, right?
Yeah.
I remember
Mm.
talking this dichotomy we're talking about an approach when I was this weekend with some friends, and the young man was there in college, and he went to Austin or UT. I don't know if he goes or not, but he was really upset that the cops arrested all these people for protesting, right? And he's
Mm.
like, I don't care about what they were protesting, but the fact in this country you can do that. Now, one guy was like, they're wrong. Boo, 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 boo. And I'm like, this is funny. Like, so
Almost all them liberal hippies. Yeah.
yeah, it was just like, and we were laughing at it, it's pretty funny. A couple beers, you start, getting charged up. And then after all this kind of went, I talked to him and I was just like, did you ever like look into anything that, like would be related to an offense, right? The charges that were brought upon them, anything that went on that was illegal, because we're allowed to protest. You get a permit. Martin Luther King got a permit to go to, like it's like this is how our country works, and it's good. It's good for you. It's good for anybody that wants to go protest. That's what makes our country great. No, I didn't look into all that. And I was like, you have to be careful to not let your emotions, right, carry you out of truth, right? Because that's when you can be manipulated.
Mm.
So we talked about the hierarchy of reason, emotions, and I think it was a really impactful conversation, because it's like, look, there's a reality here that you did not check into, and you're presuming all this. I'm not saying what happened or whatever, but I'm saying you're a smart kid. You can go find out if what went down is truly wrong, instead of just reacting to it because you heard about it and you have this feeling in this way. So, I think this is also something in our church. It's like when your emotions get caught behind, hey, we need to get this out and get, and you get like super emotional, then
Mhm.
it has to come at some point back to a rational person that can know and love God. And if they do that, they also have experienced their mercy. And so the eyes of, what you're looking at in the church should be a group of sinners, right?
That-
And trying to help people understand that and entering into God's love that way.
Now, real quick before we wrap up the conversation, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Hollow. They got this really cool thing going on for June. It's a Journey Through June with John, right? So as you head into the summer, a lot of times, there's the old saying, it's as empty as a church on a Monday in summer, right? No one goes to church in summer because they're busy, right? But you see, your prayer life, your spiritual life can often fall time in summer. You're busy, you're doing all these vacation stuff. So Hollow's got some great things to help keep you on track this summer. So they've got 10,000 prayers, meditations, music, new radio stations. They have things that you could do like when you're traveling. So like audiobooks or meditations you could do with your family on like car trips. This June, Hallow is launching their summer Bible study on the Gospel of John. So that's one of the big ones. And that's with Jeff Cavins. You know Jeff Cavins, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
And then
Bible in a year.
that's right. And then Jonathan Rumi, who does Jesus of the Chosen, they're going to be leading this Bible study through the Gospel of John through summer. So
That's awesome.
John and June.
I'm jumping in on that.
Yep. They're short meditations. It helps you to study the scripture and really stay on track this summer. So if you go to catholictalkshow.com/hollow, you can download this app 100% free and get 3 months of the premium subscription to see if this is something. They're giving you the whole summer for free. All summer long, you could try this app and see if this is something that helps you in your prayer life. And I know that it has for me. Last summer is when I started using Hallow more than I ever had in my life. I would go on a hike every morning and I would listen to the rosary, the daily reflection, and then some chant, and it was transformative. So again, catholictalkshow.com/Hallow. Try it out for free. Do the June with John, the Gospel of John with Jeff Cavins and Jonathan Rumi, and see if it's something to change your life like it has ours.
Yeah, and the summer's a great time to do it. Like you said, it's like you don't get into the grind of waking up, getting the kids, this, that, whatever it is. Now you've got sort of a little bit more latitude to begin to set up a time for prayer. And my wife always says that I think a rosary is 4% or 1% of your day.
Mm-hmm.
That resonated with me. I'm like, man, I'm not praying enough or whatever, because this is a very small part of our day. So here we are this summer. Try Hallow out for free. You're not going to regret it. I don't think we've had anybody just say, hey, Hallow stinks, it's awful. Nobody's ever said that.
So how, for the people listening, how's Jen doing? Can you give us an update?
Jen's doing good. She is obviously really appreciative of the support and prayers of everybody that watches the show. We recently had an MRI come back, and the tumor grew 1 millimeter, which is good. But she's still wearing the transducers on her head, and we're trying to get into a rhythm of a schedule because, her head burns from time to time. So definitely could use more prayers. And as we're getting into summer, we're going to start looking into some alternative immune therapies to see if they work. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're continuing to pray for her, and then, update on Father Rich. He's still out there praying for all of us. Hopefully we'll see him back soon. His mother is still going through chemo, and continue to pray for her. He's also having, I think, therapy on his knees as well during this time. So, we'll give you more updates when he's when he's ready to come back. And but everything's good.
I tell people, like, even like Rainham Christie, some other religious orders, even priests, they take sabbaticals for 6 months to a year every 10 years.
Every 10 years, they do
Every
that.
10 years, and it's been 10 years for him. And there's obviously circumstances that were beyond his control with his mother, and I've been personally encouraged by the fruitfulness of him taking a break from the priesthood, which can be very demanding, very difficult, because you're walking with people in some cases in really horrible situations with the light of Christ. So it's been good for him.
Like he told us, Christ has put him in some situations pastorally as a priest down there where he never would have been in otherwise. So,
Right.
God has a plan for everything, and God's taking care of all of that. So,
That's right. Really encouraged. Keep the
yep,
prayers up for Father Rich and his mom too.
that's right. Now, I guess, you guys are all going through it. I'm doing great. I don't know. Johnny made his first communion. I'm looking forward to summer.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing that I'd ask everyone to do is that if you're sitting here and you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and click the like button, hit the subscribe button. It's free. I'm not asking for much. I don't need anything.
Yeah, man, I don't think you're asking for much,
I
Ryan.
don't think so. I mean, look, we're giving you all this content. We're talking with you. We're friends, right? Me and Ryan, we're
Oh,
friends with
good.
all of you. That's what friends do. They click like and share and subscribe, right? Or you go to CatholicTalkShow.com and you can find all the different ways you subscribe to us on your podcast player of your choice, Apple and Spotify and all the other things. You can follow us on social media like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, which I think is still weird. It's Twitter to me and always will be. And if you want to consider supporting the show so that we can upgrade our camera situation, Ryan, you can go to CatholicTalkShow.com/hollow. No, well, you can go there too to get free hollow. But if you go to CatholicTalkShow.com/Patreon, you can see all the different ways you can support us. We have a lot of great tiers. We have things like hoodies and hats and mugs and different levels that you can help support the show and help us continue to grow. So we really appreciate all of that. So, does the Pope, Ryan, think there's too much faggotry in the seminaries? Is that really what he was saying? I really don't think so. I think it was a native Spanish speaker talking in his second language and using a term that probably wouldn't have used in his primary language. I think what he was trying to say that was there is a culture of homosexuality that is not beneficial to the priesthood prevalent in a lot of seminaries. I mean, I think that's the way that I would sum up this scenario. And with the Pope apologizing for it, I could tell he regrets any sort of
Misconstrued.
consternation or undue harm or hurt that he did by that choice of words. But again, I do think that it's worth mentioning that we completely uphold the teaching of the church that, the priesthood is not a place for a person with deep-seated homosexual tendencies. It's just not. And we can see the fruits of that in negative ways. Now, right. Homosexual persons have a lot to offer to the church and a lot of gifts that they can bring to the church that are positive, that are Christ blessed. Yeah. But I don't think the priesthood is one of them.
Yeah, and that's okay. My first marriage wasn't one of them.
Ryan, you weren't called to the priesthood, and you're not even a Frocigiane. Right? A lot of people aren't called to the priesthood. I'm not called to the priesthood.
Yeah, and that's
that's okay.
Yeah.
So we got a great episode next week. Hopefully, again, you click like, share, and subscribe. Stop back and see us next week. We'll have more great content. Continue to pray for us, and we'll pray for you. And we'll see you next week.
See you next week, guys.